Hey, welcome to A Valiant Effort. I'm Ted, and today we're introducing a new segment called Should I Buy? So over the years, a lot of people have asked Nick, Josh, and me, what type of car should I buy? What should I get? And we figured what we'd do is we'd make a comprehensive video telling you whether or not you should actually buy that car. So the first thing we're gonna do is sort of a buyer's guide. We're gonna look at the different engines, transmission options, and try to determine which ones are better, which ones are worse, whether it be in the category of performance or reliability. Now, we're probably gonna focus heavily on reliability and durability because if you're looking for used cars, that's generally what people care the most about because they wanna have something that'll get them to work or to see their family with some degree of consistency. And that's really important. That was important to me, and that's why I ended up with this thing right behind us here, which we'll be looking at next week. So the second thing we're gonna look at is maintenance. How often do they have to be maintained? What has to be maintained? And how expensive is it to do that maintenance? Because that's probably what most of you are wondering. What does it cost to own insert car there? So we're gonna talk about what breaks the most often, what are the known issues with each car and their trim level, depending, whatever engine they happen to have, what are the failures with that or that transmission. I bought this with a manual, not just because I want a manual, but because the autos and the V6s are known failure points. They're absolute shit. And so, should I buy? No, never buy, don't buy. So if you're not a nutty gearhead like us, you're probably not going to care about this next part. But for those of you that do work on your own cars, we'll also talk about what tools you'll need. Does this car require special tools or does it require Torx bits to do certain jobs? How hard is it? A timing belt job may not be something that a lot of people would tackle, but on a Miata, maybe you would. How easy is it to change the oil, to do spark plugs, to do simple things like that? So in other words, how hard is it for the average person? And I think we're a pretty good representation, at least Nick and me, of who the average person is as far as working on your own cars. So before we cover the third and final section we are including in our Should I Buy videos, the final being driving experience, I wanted to quickly cover the 4 relevant categories of reliability we are considering for each car. One thing we're going to look at is a lot of the misconceptions that people have about reliability. That's one of the most important topics we're going to cover, so we figure let's break it down because there's a couple of different categories that we can talk about. One of them is just unreliable and expensive. And something that's unreliable and expensive is going to be, say, a B5 S4 or any BMW from the modern era, or an Alfa Romeo. Those things are going to be both unreliable and expensive to maintain. Now, most of you probably aren't going to be looking for old Alfas, so the category I think a lot of people are going to run into is reliable, yet expensive to maintain. Now, Nick's B8 S4, B8.5 S4 is actually going to fall into that category because it's been super reliable for 140,000 miles. He's had it for 87. He's had barely any issues. And yet, it's very expensive to maintain. Parts are pretty expensive and labor is expensive, so thankfully he can do a lot of the work himself. Then we have things that are going to be cheap to maintain and yet unreliable. And I actually see, if you look over there, it's a Chevy Equinox. They're very bad. So that's gonna be something that parts are cheap, labor's cheap, and yet it's still fairly unreliable. Things break, maybe it doesn't strand you, but it certainly isn't going to cost you $0 over the course of, 150,000 miles. The last category is the one I shoot for and I recommend a lot of times, and obviously, but something that's reliable and cheap to maintain. And usually that's something like, this Honda Accord here, or honestly, if you want a fun car, right there, cheap and reliable. They don't break down a lot. Not a lot of parts break, not a lot of known failure points, and yet you can get things for next to nothing on Rock Auto too. And we understand that sometimes you want a car and it doesn't matter if it's unreliable because the charm is there. The driving experience is just so good, or the ownership experience in general is just so fun and enjoyable that you don't really care if it's unreliable or unreliable and expensive. If I could afford to, I would own a Lamborghini Murcielago, and maybe one day I will. So like non-voiceover me said, we understand that reliability and maintenance concerns are not everyone's top priority when looking for a used car. So that's why we decided to do a brief driving slash livability review in all these videos. So the last thing that we're going to talk about in these videos is the driving experience, because yes, even though I know that we're going to be focusing on reliability and the ease of repair, because those are things that are most important to people buying cars in the used car, $3,000 to $10,000 range. And that's what was most important to me. That's why I got this. I only paid $2,700 for this car, and it's been great. But I know that people still care about what it's like to drive. And the thing is, yeah, maybe you could go watch a review from, when the car came out 10, 13, 15 years ago. But what is a car like after all that time? How do they hold up? How do the electronics hold up? How does the AC, how long do the compressors last? I don't know, whatever. How do they hold up? How do all the materials still feel after 50 years? So, 50 years. How do the materials still feel after 15 years? Do things still open and close the way they should? How does the transmission feel? One complaint that a lot of people have had about Toyota manuals is that because they use, I don't know, rubber lines or something for the clutch linkage, or for the shifter linkage rather, they tend to get stretched and kind of wobbly and goofy over 10 years or so. Whereas with Honda, they use metal rods, so this still feels pretty much as it did when it was new. These are the things that you might want to know when you're buying a used car. The other thing you might want to know, if you're a car person, which you may well be if you're watching this video, is it fun? And in the case of this car, yeah, it's pretty fun still. Is it super fast? No. But, for $2,700, what can you really get that's super fast? Not a lot. These are the things that, you might want to know when you're buying a car like this, or any used car. How's the steering feel? How's the brake feel? The throttle modulation? What's the clutch like? How's the gear lever feel? And these are all important things for buying a used car. And beyond the performance side of things, what does it get for gas mileage realistically after all that time? How do the seats feel? Are they comfortable? I don't really have back issues, but sometimes I get uncomfortable in car seats, and I never do in this. And we've reviewed a ton of cars at this point where I'm like, oh yeah, these are comfortable seats. And then I get back in this and I go, these are more comfortable. Mid-2000s Honda, they knew how to make seats, I guess. So there are all these questions that you might have that I know I always ask myself when I'm looking for a used car. These are things that I want to know about. And unfortunately, it's hard to get all of those things in one package. That's what we're going to do for you as best we can. Comprehensively answer the question, should I buy?